So hello everyone and welcome to WeNaturalists special event to commemorate the upcoming World Environment Day, which will be on June 5th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. On World Environment Day, we are reminded to take care of the Earth. There are so many threats constantly facing the survival of Earth and its inhabitants, with climate change being one of the biggest threats. This day reminds us that there is only one Earth, and what better way to take care of our Earth than to instill the concepts of protecting our Earth to children so that they may grow to value and safeguard our Earth. Today, we want to focus on the need for a green childhood. We will hear from an amazing panel that works closely with the young generation to educate them and teach them ways in which they can actively play their part in protecting the Earth. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Our first panelist is Michael Ayaki, founder and CEO of Miti Alliance, a social enterprise operating in Kenya, with a focus on planting and growing trees and providing environmental education. Welcome, Michael. Our second panelist is Hita.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Michael. Our second panelist is Hita Lakani. She's a climate educator with the ClimAct initiative, and she's a firm believer in the power of youth participation in grassroots and international processes. Since 2015, she has been active locally and internationally, working towards creating change makers. Welcome, Hita, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our third panelist is Nikhil Sharma. He's a climate educator who is currently leading Elementary Education Foundation to bring climate education to classrooms. He started his journey as a Teach for India Fellow, where he worked towards student leadership and experiential learning programs. You're very welcome, Nikhil.
Thank you, Catherine.
So let's get straight to it. So they say charity begins at home. So what effective practices at home and at school can promote children's functional knowledge of sustainable issues? Maybe we can start with Nikhil.
Okay, thanks, Catherine, for the question. So from a long period of time, we haven't focused much on the cultural practices which we generally focus, to inculcate a sustainable behavior among children. And this sustainable behavior, which actually lasts for a longer period of time. Like in India, if we see, culturally, there have been a lot of practices in the early times before consumerism took over our lives in the metro cities and all. We were more used to use the resources, recycle them, upcycle them in our household. And these behaviors actually inculcated in the children during the childhood actually went ahead in the adulthood as well. But in recent times, we have been shifting around in use and throw practices, And these sustainability practices, which we teach to our kids, they start realizing how resource management should be done. So a lot of skill is revolving around that. And our day-to-day practices, basically from parenting, from the community, from the school, needs to focus on these practices where children actually respects about the mother nature, how resources are available to them, and how they use it.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. Michael, could you add a little bit on which effective practices at home and school can promote children's functional knowledge?
Yeah, so what we have noticed is that, especially for kids, when they're at home, they are in an environment where they are able to learn or even just engage with the outdoors. So what I would say is we're seeing there's an opportunity for children in the environment. Say, for example, you're in a community where people practice this kind of farming, but there's birds in that environment. There's the indigenous knowledge that those children can get from their parents or from their community. And we see that by also utilizing that and allowing them to engage in that kind of knowledge is that we are digging deeper into our customs, into our indigenous ways of, say, farming or even restoration. And I think that's where the conversation of sustainability issues is brought about, that we grew our food this way. Was it good or was it bad? And here are the new practices that we have. And what ways should we keep and what ways should we not keep? Then now they're able to get that from school and then take it as well at home, or they learn it from home and take it to the school. So it's an enabling kind of environment where these kids are able to explore different ways of things, but maximizing on the indigenous knowledge. Yeah.
And Hita, do you think that, have you actually come across instances of indigenous knowledge being used to preserve the environment by children?
Yeah, I think there are different ways that this can happen without actually realizing that this is, coming through traditional practices. Like Michael said, sometimes children tend to pick up and mimic what elders in the house are doing or what goes on in the school. So if there is a practice that the community or that the children, that the parents have been following, like for example, ensuring that you're looking after the plants that are around, or ensuring that the communities are engaged in the conservation activities without really calling them conservation activities. These are values that children grow up with and they grow up understanding. So then this doesn't become separate from their lifestyle. It's not something that they do, in your free time, or not something that you do because it is school, but it's a way of life. And then I think that's when, as you grow older, you realize how interlinked our life is with the natural world as well.
Thank you, Hita. And are there any programs that your organization has adopted, and how exactly do you measure the impact?
So we've been working on education projects mainly, so trying to ensure that the scientific gap between what is really happening in the space, where are we in terms of climate change, and how can you take action? There is a lot of gap between knowing what's happening out there and knowing what you can do to take action. And then, of course, going ahead and taking action is the next step. What we've tried to do is really bridge the gap. So give very actionable steps. Could start from very small scale individual projects to then leading on to community and so on and so forth. So really building up the momentum there. So what we've been really focusing on is to bridge this knowledge gap, focusing on action at the end of it.
And Nikhil?
Okay, so we have been very specifically working on climate change, okay, where we are introducing kids about climate science, what climate change is actually. Generally, we relate climate change to a lot of different things, like maybe waste management could be a part of sustainability, plantations could be part of the sustainability. Our focus has been mostly around the climate science education. We want kids to be aware about how climate change is happening and what is the role of carbon emissions. Although climate change is a very, very vast topic and it has unlimited impacts which we see around it in different aspects, different areas. We are focusing how kids become aware about their climate carbon footprint, okay, and they take steps in certain manner that they can reduce the carbon footprint. They can make strategies for school to become carbon neutral, okay. So a program like Young Leaders for Climate Action Fellowship is a 3-month program where we initially teach them about climate science for 8 weeks, but later on we want them to do projects probably on mobility, energy, water, revolving on how they can resolve the community issues and the school issues, and they can help the schools become carbon resilient, climate resilient, and carbon neutral in the longer run. So this has been our focus. We have also been working with the educators, how they can bring sustainability or climate change to their classroom. There has been a struggle with teachers to get resources and curriculum fully designed, which they can bring directly to the classroom. So we have been working with the educators as well to empower them. In the longer run, also we want to work with the schools to become them carbon neutral and how they can channelize climate action or climate adaptation projects in communities around them. So that has been our work so far.
Thank you, Nikhil. Michael, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your environmental programs and how you've adapted and how you've measured the impact.
So we have a program called the Meaty Schools program, and it focuses on going into schools where we seek to understand what has the school already done, what kind of environmental issues do they have. We sort of have like a baseline that we conduct once we visit a school. Because you could go to a school and think you're introducing something, but it's not needed. Or you want to plant trees, but there's no gate, there's no water, there's no water tank. They don't know about water harvesting. So those are some of the things that we carry out, like a baseline survey. So once we have that, then we're able to now introduce our learning programs. So currently what we have is we're using VR, virtual reality kits, where we give the kids an experience to kind of have a link between conservation and education. So making it fun, making learning fun, while they are also engaging with us, maybe now eventually to the conservation and planting of trees. Because if you don't link those two things, they don't know why you want them to plant the trees in the school in the first place. And then the other thing that we're doing in terms of how we measure the impact is the care. So eventually what happens is we start with the training. After the training and learning experience, we go to the actual planting. So you allocate, every child must have a seedling. So you go there 3 months, 6 months, and look at, are these kids taking care of their seedlings? And that's how now you start measuring impact. Eventually, you know some of the schools are really doing well, while others are not doing so well. And the ones that are doing well, you could give them feedback and tell them, hey, there's a problem with the care for your trees. Others, you even go further with them. Some you start setting up a tree nursery in the school, and eventually the seedlings will go to another step, which will be to plant in the same school, or they take them to their homes. So that's how we have introduced our programs based on a baseline survey and a needs analysis.
Okay, is there any way to monitor any progress that they make at home? For example, you teach them in the schools, they monitor their trees, they take care of their trees, but what education can they take home in order to make sure that they also, educate others as well as, tree plant at home as well?
So that's a good question. So what we've been trying is inviting the parents over. So a child may want to grow a tree, but the parent does not want to grow that specific tree because they want to grow trees for timber or for wood or for other needs. So it's first sensitizing the child, who goes to tell the parent. Then the parent is able to come back and say, okay, I think what we've discovered is that they want fruit trees. Mostly they want fruit trees. So that for us has been like a thing where we are saying, okay, we are trying to introduce this, but everybody wants this. So people want fruit trees because they will eat from that. So that's something we've learned, that we bring in the parents as well.
Thank you, Michael. So Hita, how can you actually monitor if there's a lifestyle change amongst the kids?
Yeah, I think to actually monitor lifestyle changes, I think is a little harder because it's very hard to see what's going on at home. But what we've been trying to do is have them to journal certain activities, like have a food journal, for example, if they're trying to see lifestyle changes in the way that you're consuming food, what kind of food you're consuming, how much packaging do you sort of use through the kind of food that you're consuming. So different kinds of journaling activities, and this can be replicated for different things as well. Outside of food, it can be replicated with a lot of different actions to see whether there is a change over the course of a month, over the course of 3 months, so on and so forth. But outside of really what your interaction with the kids is, and really it could, especially for the past 2 years since we've been working in the virtual setting, it's a little harder to really see these kind of changes on a day-to-day basis. But if there is an in-person interaction regularly, I think it's a little bit also to visualize how the kid, sort of the behavior of the child, their mindset towards certain things, whether the mindset towards the natural world, mindset towards the way that they were sort of consuming things, looking at things outside, seeing if that has changed through their actions, to their conversations, could also be different ways of monitoring. But otherwise, I think it's pretty hard to just see what is happening inside the house, how they're sort of, if there is any concrete changes in that sense.
Nikhil, same question. Do you notice a lifestyle change, or how do you measure lifestyle change amongst the children that you work with?
So we monitor the lifestyle changes related to their carbon emissions reduction. Okay. So if the students are enrolling for the program and they become a part of it, after this climate science education and their portfolio, we develop climate portfolios for kids. So during this portfolios development, student portfolios, it's similar to the student portfolios. They actually mention out different areas where they are making a lot of carbon emissions, they are harming the nature, or what sustainable changes they can bring. Okay. And for the 4 weeks of time period when we are working with them, they target to reduce their carbon footprint by 10% or 20%. They set up goals for them. Like we have class goals set for literacy levels and all. We ask them to set up goals or the project they're picking up. Like recently, kids were doing a sustainability mobility project, 6 students from one school. So their goal was that how can they inculcate a behavior of bringing cycling or more cycling to school. So the research project was around this. They collected the data and then they figured out that only 7-8% students were doing cycling to school. So they set up a goal that 1 month they want to bring this data to 12% or 15%. So they set these goals and then we monitor them, that are they able to achieve those goals. If they're not, what are the possible reasons for not achieving those goals, okay, not reaching those changes. And if there is something which they can do in the coming 4 more weeks, so we monitor them, we mentor them for that. And this is how we also calculate our impact in the classroom. One very good example would be one school where we were working, and there was this garbage burning site in the school, waste burning site. The school used to burn their waste and all. So for the initial 3 months, they set up a goal to remove the waste burning site. For the another 1 month, they set up a goal, how can they plant something in that site and convert it into a carbon sink. And by the end of the 1 year, they were able to sequestrate around 24 tons of carbon sequestration in 1 year. So this is the goal setting which we are doing every quarterly with the kids who enroll for the program. But we haven't been doing much with the schools directly, but we would work with directly with the children who enroll for the program, and then we monitor the carbon footprint, what knowledge we can impart them, what skills they can take. And for the skills, we actually use the rubric which we have. So we have a rubric which we have designed for climate science knowledge and skill development, which we use for our fellowship program and for other programs with the schools right now.
Thank you, Nikhil. So we have a question from the audience for Hita. Do you think gamification can improve the monitoring part?
Do I think gamification? Sorry, what was the question again?
Yes. Can adding the concept of gamification improve the monitoring part?
I think absolutely. It depends on what kind of elements that you're adding, like really how it sort of works. With the students, it also depends on the age range of the children that you're working with. But I definitely think adding an angle of gamification can help in creating that sort of change, helping children to really want to do more, and then eventually also help in trying to monitor these changes, whether it is getting points on games or whatever that might be. So I definitely think it could possibly be another solution for monitoring and inculcating the change.
Thank you. There's another question. What best measures can be taken to introduce climate change challenges in schools that is cheap and sustainable? Maybe Michael, you can answer this one.
Yeah, I think an easy way, I don't know how it is in other areas, but the kids are smart enough to have really realized that there's stuff happening in their communities. So sometimes we go to a school and you think that these kids, you're introducing to them the topic for the first time, but they're really awake and aware of what's happening. So when you highlight the issues and the causes and how to deal with, I like how Nikhil has highlighted how to deal with that as an issue of like the dump site. So like in our place is that you see kids asking us to give them trees to take home so that their place can be as green as their school. So we are finding that more and more children are actually aware that we are facing climate change issues. For us here, it's mostly the lack of rain, the harsh weather. When it rains, it actually floods, things like that. So they are noticing these things. So all you have to do is now highlight why that is happening.
Okay, maybe.
Okay, sorry. I just want to add something. Yeah, so I just wanted to add to more Michael. Kids are but I have experienced in the past couple of years is they just need to push, and they're always up to take the challenges and do it. Like for the dump side, if I mention you, it wasn't me. So most of the time when as an educator, we approach a problem, we want to silence them. It's just that you have to shadow them and they will be able to take it in a manner. They will not calculate how it will look after 4 months or 5 months. They'll start the action. Even the Fridays of future, the climate strikes which happen, kids are much more up to take sustainability issues. They're not calculating in their heads that what benefits I will get out of it. If they feel that it's a problem, they will try to solve it. Whatever possible manners, what design thinking they know, whatever is the resources available to them. It's just this, they need a little push that you have to do this and they'll go for it.
Thank you, Nikhil. Hita, do you have anything to add on that? Nothing?
Yeah, I think I would completely agree with what was said.
Okay. Let's move on to our next question. Do you think that short-term and long-term certification-based courses create a larger impact as compared to general knowledge-based teachings on a regular basis? Maybe we start with Nikhil.
I think it's not the certification or knowledge-based courses. I think more project-based or experiential learning courses makes much more sense to children. If you go with kids from the age group from 3 to say 7 or 8, where you have experiential learning projects where they're playing with the nature, they're spending time with soil, planting trees, they get more skills out of there. In terms of giving knowledge is definitely needed in the longer run, that they can get knowledge, but contextualizing it with the activities or the action they can take at the grassroots will be more helpful in the longer run, where they can start inculcating those practices. Then what happens, a lot of us know about climate change, but still we fail, even after certification of our courses, we still fail to channelize into action. Most of us won't even know our climate, our carbon footprint. Okay, so these jargons or big terms which we use in certification or knowledge generally does not channelize into action on the grassroots or the local context. Okay, so those experiential learning programs in the schools around nature-based learning, like Michael said that he gives trees away. The child will go and he will figure it out, how to plant it. If it failed to grow for the first time, he will try to think why it failed. Okay, and in this process of trial and error, experimentation, experiential learning, he will figure out things and he'll try to learn more. In theoretical and certification courses, he will just either do for certification, get some knowledge, and may not channelize to the experiential action which we want. We want more of action now. In terms of creating more of certified or knowledge-based resources, we need people who can take action on the ground. So I think action-based or project-based learning would be more helpful in this manner.
Okay. Hita, can you add on that?
Yeah, I think I would absolutely agree with everything that Nikhil has said so far. I mean, certification courses I think are absolutely great for maybe a little bit of the older age groups, a little older kids or anyone older. Especially if you're looking to say, add on to your skills so far, or you're looking for certain niche like things that you're wanting to learn and sort of improve yourself there, or looking for certain professional prospects. But really to make change, I don't think you need any certificate that proves that, okay, you're now a change maker. I think it just needs motivation. And as long as you're able to do that, and usually that comes through a regular reminding. So even if it's very basic stuff, but as long as for children that happens on a daily basis, it's basically a habit building. And as long as you can build a habit, you can make change. So you really don't need any certificate outside to prove that you can now make changes. But certification courses are, of course, have their own benefits for depending on what you want out of it, and if you want to sort of have some skill building, so on and so forth.
Thank you. Maybe we can hear from an African perspective. Michael, do you think that certification-based courses are actually necessary?
Well, honestly, I agree with Nikhil and Hita, because we've seen so many people get the certification, even older people. And really the bottom line is the action. But what I would like to add from what has been said already is the aspect of this being inculcated in the education system, where I remember in our time we would go out with magnifying glass. When we go out with the magnifying glass, you're looking at butterflies, you're looking at flowers, you're looking at that, what Nikhil said, experiential learning. Uh, that sinks in. And I think some of those things are the ones that I was able to benefit from, because while growing up, there was something called 4K clubs. So the 4K clubs were really a great success during our time, but now they are not there anymore. But you see, that was part of learning. So that has been a missing key part. Like, yes, we are focusing on kids performing really well. We want them to succeed. We want them to have, to go to university. But the basics that we learned in the 4K club as a scout, about camping, about doing, living in the wild, living with nature, I think those are the things that really made me. But you see, I wasn't certified in anything, but those were things that were engraved in behavior. So now behavioral change happens over a long period of time. So I feel the certification is only so much, maybe for the trainers, but for the kids is behavioral change, from pollution to composting to growing trees to learning to care for birds or creatures, not to kill chameleons or not to stone birds, small things, a balanced world. Yeah.
Okay, so while we are on the topic of education systems, like you, I grew up in a setting where we used to do physical activities and we had clubs of the sorts. So, Michael, what exactly do you think that we should do with the current education system? Or what do you suggest should happen in order to make sure that kids can learn more and can be more active in this field?
I think what's happening right now in Kenya is that there is a new reintroduction of a curriculum based, there's competency-based curriculum that has just been reintroduced. They are trying to go back to the curriculum that I benefited from. So for me, I see it that the gap that I've already seen is that the teachers are well trained, yes, but they are not. There needs to be specific teachers who are trained in environmental issues, climate change issues. They have the general knowledge, maybe from what they research on. But imagine if there was a teacher in a school who would train the kids on learning the different indigenous species of trees, their benefit, or the soil, or issues such as that. And then now link that to climate education, more so making it part of what the kids are learning. Water conservation, water collection, planting of these trees, or 1, 2, 3 different things. So for us, we have a new good curriculum, but the teachers still don't have the right training. So I'm seeing where, from your earlier question, is where teachers could get the certification in the various schools, because there is enough teachers across the country. But there is also a big number of schools. Why not certify these teachers to be able to train these kids on climate change, on climate issues? So I feel like that's the gap that we are facing in our education system. Yeah.
Okay, can we hear from an Indian perspective? What do you think, what changes can be adopted in the current education system so as to make sure that climate education is more mainstream? Nikhil?
So the first major change which we need for climate education is the policy changes. India being a large country coming from different demographics, I think policy changes are something which can drive a countrywide change in terms of introducing climate education in classrooms. The climate education curriculum, or what kind of experiential learning or how localization of curriculum can be done would be later stage. But right now, a couple of organizations, maybe in different cities, Bombay, Ahmedabad, they're focusing on climate education. Climate literacy is not a part of any curriculum right now in India. Okay, though in the national education policy, nature-based education was introduced, but climate education, like in Italy, they have compulsory 1 hour of weekly climate education as per their policies, right? And it is done in the classroom. So in that case, if policies come, research, more good curriculum, local contextualized curriculum would flow in automatically. And the market need will also evolve where people will start to pour in resources and money to do research around it and bringing it to classrooms. So I think the first fundamental change we need around the climate education is the policies. Second, the internationally, like UNESCO has opened this office for climate education in Paris. Okay, climate education has been centered around European countries. I haven't seen much work in the North American arena currently, but I think a lot of good institutions are bringing courses around climate education. They're also introducing it in their education management courses and masters as well. But in the Asian African context, we need more contextualized and localized action where our government, in partner with the international organization, which are focusing on, like if UNESCO has opened the office in London, okay, where definitely it is needed. They go ahead and start something in African context in some African country on a office for climate education, or something in the South Asian country, which are badly impacted by the climate change, and how they can bring, because if offices are centered in Europe, the resources or the involvement of the youth generally stays centered to those countries rather than flowing to the African or the Asian countries. And third major change would be, how can we push it more towards in the education classroom with training sessions, teacher training and all, teacher training and the school transformation around climate change education. So these are three fundamental things which we basically need. And then the further pathway of involving children, bringing action projects is along with the non-government organization or private organization can work really well. If Hita can add something to over this, I think that will be helpful. She has a context about the Indian scenario in the education space.
Yeah, I think some very valid points have been brought up so far. And I think especially very much focusing on the Indian climate education scenario, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of how we're communicating the problems or how we're communicating the entire issue. So even if it's just environmental education, at different levels, I think some schools, some state boards call it environmental science, so on and so forth. A lot of the time it's done only because one, it is a subject that is easy to breeze through, like it will just bring you extra marks for the exam. So the value in actually putting in the time to learn about certain issues, certain problems is not really given the true amount of time and effort that it should be, whether it's from the teacher's side, whether it's from the student side, because our academic system focuses on grades and focuses on marks. And usually a lot of the times, either this is a scoring subject where you get very simple answers and you can score, or it is a subject that is not really contributing to your academic grades. So it's like an audit subject that you can just, as long as you pass the subject, that's enough for your academic, for the grade sheet. So really the approach of how seriously we take this, the approach with which it's taught, which also means that the teachers need to get training, the teachers need to be taught to teach this in a different manner, in a manner that is more receptive for the students. And the second thing is the curriculum in itself really needs to be more inclusive, more action-oriented, really looking at solutions, looking at what good can come out of the entire process, really leaving the children feeling with a sense of hope, rather than just talking about the problems that are there. And also really making these up to date, because of course, on a day-to-day basis. So really updating the curriculum regularly is something that needs 10 years ago, 20 years ago when this was.
So there is a need for environment-based curriculum. Kids not only need to learn, but in turn share their thoughts with adults in their home and their community. So the discussion needs to reach the dining table. What thoughts do you have, or what insights do you have on this? Michael, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Sorry, I was trying to get your question and the wind was really blowing. You were saying?
saying that there's a question from a participant which says the need of an environment-based curriculum is growing. Kids not only need to learn, but in turn share their thoughts with adults in their home and their community. The discussion needs to reach the dining table. Do you have any insights on this thought?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I feel the discussion on climate change has reached, for lack of a better word, maybe middle class and upper, because this is being taught in the international schools. It is being taught in schools that have capacity to run environmental programs. This is our experience here in Kenya, and what I see is when a kid from a very rural school goes to their home, to their dining table, possibly their parent wants, because of the poverty level, wants to plant a tree that they can cut to sell for timber, as compared to planting an indigenous tree that will be home for birds and butterflies and all those kind of things. So we are dealing with that kind of child who will take the conversation to the table and be heard, and the child who will take that conversation to the table and not be heard. So for the majority, these kids belong to public schools, and I feel like nationally there needs to be campaigns that will highlight the issues that we are facing because of climate change. And overall, I think the bigger issue is that we have the older generation and what they believe, and the current generation, who are the ones who are leading in the strikes, saying, guys, you need to change your ways because you're not leaving anything for us. But that's not happening for the majority. So how can we communicate to the children? So like for us, what we are testing, which the test is not yet over, is where we involve the parents after we've been successful in the school. So there's still a lot to be done. The conversation is still yet to be had, because between money, trees that will be sold to pay for high school and trees that will allow birds to flourish is two different conversations. So they would rather plant the fruit trees. So maybe why we are trying to enter into the household is, can you plant fruit trees that you can sell the fruits, but you're also greening the environment? So that's how we have dealt with it, but it's quite an issue in terms of, because of disposable income and levels of income. Yeah.
Nikhil, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that the involvement of the communities and the parents. So, the program which we are currently doing, we face this challenge of, because when the child is, because a large portion of the child spend in the community. So, how do they sustainability? How do they see climate change? A lot of perception also comes from the community. A lot of kids which so there has been a different opinion which I've seen. So kids from the from the vulnerable communities where we work for climate change, okay, we have seen that the impact has been really great, and their carbon footprints are much lower than what we see in the high income communities or high income schools. Okay, so the things which see the kind of resources they have had at house in the low income community, in the high income community, it's such a great part. So in that case, the kind of approach which we have to take to inculcate the behavior change at the home, or the kind of conversation which they have at the table, the dinner table, has to be different. And someday the question or the dilemma also arrives to us. The communities which contributes least to the climate change are the ones which are receiving at the receiving ends right now. Okay, so going there and driving action, probably we can focus about climate adaptation for them. But at the same time, the kind of conversation with there, because the carbon footprints, what I have noticed, is even lesser than what the Indian average, the global average is, like 1.9 tons. Okay, kids from the low income communities have much lesser carbon footprint than that. Okay, but still we want that they include their parents for the conversation. They go and calculate their energy consumption at the home and all, which is already very low. But in high income community schools, we find a large gap where the conversation can go back to the home. Okay, where we can include the parents further, that how can they bring this thing in their daily livelihood. They can monitor their energy uses or their mobility options. Okay, and this is where I think that a lot of opportunity lies in bringing the change. We need to bring it to the homes, to the community first.
Just to ask all of you, have any of your organizations worked on pushing for policies related to climate education, either with local leaders or national leaders? Have any of you done that? Hita?
Yeah, so I've been involved a little bit internationally at the United Nations on the UN climate change process. And through that, there is a youth movement, and within that, there's a specific working group that focuses on climate education. And there has definitely been a lot of different kinds of demands and focuses to have in climate education, different types of. So there's something known as the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is a process or which is a framework under the UN climate change body. It's called ACE in short, and there are 6 elements of ACE, and climate education is one of the 6 elements. So education in formal settings, informal, non-formal, different kinds of settings that they look at. And through the ACE work program, I think there's a lot of different sort of progress that has happened. I think this is one of the most progressive tracks under the UN negotiations as a whole as well. I think people do truly realize the importance of climate education, the importance of young people in climate education, and sort of civil society, or basically just civic engagement through climate education processes. So at COP26 in Glasgow, also there is a new sort of work program which has been now adopted, and which really looks at education, young people together in different lenses. So yeah, have had a very international sort of policy kind of experience, but there definitely is a lot of appetite for climate education.
Before I move on to someone else, how welcoming are our leaders when it comes to hearing about such changes? If you want more climate education, are they welcoming, or is it a challenge?
I think they're definitely welcoming. So there are lots of different kinds of approaches that are being taken, whether it's through the policy road, whether it's through different sort of engagement internationally, whether it is sort of trying to advocate for change, lobbying for change at different levels. So there are also organizations that have had a whole climate literacy campaign that they've been following. For example, EarthDay.org has been doing an entire climate literacy campaign for the past year or so, trying to get countries on board. There have been youth-led or sort of, how do you say, especially at COP26, there were quite a lot of youth-led initiatives that focused on bringing climate education to the forefront, had a few education ministers from countries that came on board to sort of, step up and say that they will inculcate climate education in their countries. So there is a lot of appetite, definitely. People are willing to hear, they understand the need for education now. I think what is really important is really to take it from this understanding, from this sort of very well-meaning tone of things, to really see how much can we implement back home. So how much of, without saying yes, India, for example, has climate education throughout its curriculum, but how much of it is really boiling down into understanding, into action. And I think that is where a lot of the challenges lie, in not just ensuring that there is a subject in the school curriculum, but ensuring that that subject is understandable, is a part of the mainstream curriculum, not something that is sidelined, and that is given the focus that it requires. Of course, academics should be overarching and looking at different elements, including, of course, your math, science, whatever else that you're studying, but looking at this as part of the process, not looking at it aside of everything else that you study. So there are different kinds of, I think that, like I said, this is one of the most, internationally, this is one of the most easy places to make change. Like if you have demands, this is one of the most easiest ways where likely for change to happen, which is already good because people have understood the need for it. But there are different ways of how this translates, and really seeing that the translation into action is in the most meaningful manner is what we need to work on.
Thank you, Hita. Nikhil, has your organization worked on any policies or tried to push for policies related to climate education?
We haven't done work with the government or the state level policy changes. We have worked with a couple of organizations to include climate education in their classrooms or their schools, which are directly working with schools or classrooms. So we are currently pushing for that. And probably in the longer run, we would like to be a part of this larger movement where we should push for climate education. And our approach would be mostly around the children, probably pushing for the policies to include climate education in their classrooms or to provide exposure opportunities for them to build skills around climate change. So in the longer, we haven't so far worked with the government for policy changes. Our focus has been on climate education, but in the longer run, we feel ourselves to be part of this movement where we push for climate education policies.
Thank you. Michael, have you done any work related to policies? And if yes, how were you received?
So for us, we haven't done any push per se. Yes, we are building the partner base of people who have capacity. Again, we must appreciate how much it takes to change policy or introduce policy on certain things. So in Kenya, it's not an easy one. What though we are trying to do is pick as many lessons for the next 2 years and then have substantial evidence to present why education should be climate change issues should be highlighted in education, what is needed, what are the gaps, but also to have that kind of policy partner or person who will walk with us on the journey. Because remember, on one side, we are a growing organization. We're not that big. And therefore, the resource, the teams, the people that are needed to push that, it's quite some resource that is needed to do that. So we know that we can't start going to one direction while we are still in the schools, having fun with the children, doing all these fun activities. And that's what's going to inform the whole aspect of policy. So, yeah, I think we should be ready in the next year or so. I think 2023 by end of year. But also what we're trying to build is capacity and also build a strong case. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. So each of you work in different areas, and there are so many other people like you who are working in different countries. So what practices can be adopted to make environment education or climate education interconnected across borders? Nikhil?
Yeah. So recently I was a part of this community, which is led by Teach for All. Okay. So Teach for All works, their daughter organizations like Teach for India, Teach for Kenya, Teach for Zimbabwe. They work in different countries, right? And climate change being a global problem, environmental problems are very global, right? Okay. And the kind of knowledge which we need, okay, the kind of movement which you're leading, right? For either for climate policy transformation or inculcating. I think such larger platforms where we can be part of a larger community would be helpful in the longer run. And during being part of this Teach for All's community, also I realized that these cross-border collaborations are very, very helpful. Like we are also sitting on a platform where we are actually coming from different nationalities, okay. But the climate change problem, okay, and the climate education which we are talking about, the climate science is going to remain the same. The fundamentals of it going to remain same. The contextualization can only change in terms of the climate impact we have regionally. Probably in cities of the coastal cities might have impact in terms of rising sea levels. Okay, so this is how we want to prepare our children, the future leaders, for different climate impacts we have, and we can definitely learn from practices across borders. Like from Italy, we can definitely learn that what were the shortcomings they faced by implementing this climate education program in Italy. Okay, or what challenges New Zealand is facing as a country while they brought climate education to their classroom. Okay. There's this green school in Bali, okay, which has been working on climate change, and the school is situated in the forest area, okay. So can that model can work out in countries like Africa or probably in India? So I think the knowledge or the experience which we have from the cross-border communities is that we can learn from their mistakes. We can actually see what things failed at their end, what things worked out their end, and can I contextualize that to my learning in my community, in my city? Okay, so that's what way I feel that things can work out really well. Okay, and the larger communities from different areas where things have been successfully implemented will actually push or inspire or motivate people to begin these things, like what case studies or what's research they have to do before they start on this action projects. That's all of my take on this aspect.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. Hita?
Yeah, I think in addition to everything that Nikhil said, I think that's very valid. To really ensure that basically, I think that climate education in essence is the same across the world. It's just how you sort of contextualize it, how it's implemented is different from different places. So really, if we can bring a connect with different kinds of education models, different schools that are doing different things, or individuals, groups, different students, if we can help connect them, if children can meet other children around their ages from different areas, learn what they're doing, how they're sort of overcoming certain challenges in their own countries, in their own areas, how are they implementing certain things. I think there can be a lot of different cross-pollination that can happen through this process. So really trying to enable this kind of interconnectedness, trying to enable the dialogues that would otherwise not happen in a normal scenario. And now I think, especially over the past couple of years, people have realized how easy it is virtually to connect with people from different parts of the world. So maybe just trying to have, these sort of conversations at a routine level, even if it's not every day, if it's every few months, every quarter. I think exchanging and learning from other people really help in like building new ideas and cultivating different manners. So while we do need at a national level also learn from different countries how they're sort of implementing what their policies are, what it's sort of looking like on a top-down approach, also just the bottom-up collaboration and conversations might help as well.
Thank you. Michael, can you add on that?
So from my side, I think what comes to mind, I think it has been mentioned, is a way in which we can share our best practices. And other than sharing our best practices, can we really customize this education? Like say, for example, something has worked in India really well, and it is customized in Kiswahili, in our local language, and that it is able to be understood from a community level, a school level, a student level. And that kind of information is what is not so accessible, because there are so many people out there doing amazing things, but we don't know what's really working, because maybe we want to showcase that so that we can access more funding. But if we look at it from a collaborative perspective and sharing best practices, then we are going to safeguard our environment, we're going to safeguard climate change issues, and this will be a global, something that causes global kind of revolution, because it's the knowledge that people lack. If something worked in West Africa, it could work in another region that is of the same kind of climate somewhere across the world. But nobody knows about it because it has not been documented, or they have not shared their true life experiences. So that, for me, I feel is that there are amazing things happening across the world, but the best practices are not being shared. So we are still all caught up in our challenging project activities. Possibly there's someone who has already written the curriculum, and that curriculum just needs to be translated, and the rights mention that they are the ones who wrote the curriculum, but it is been written in Swahili or in English. So these are some of the things that I'm seeing that we end up struggling. We are all looking for funding to expand or scale, but I'm hoping that there will be areas in which people will share their best practices and share their programs so that they can be scaled in other countries. and now possibly scale the transformation that we all are looking for. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to open the floor, for questions. If there's anyone in the audience who has a question, you can just raise your hand or you can write it in the chat box. We don't have any questions. Thank you, guys. This was a very, very interesting session. We learned a lot from you. Before we close, I'd like to welcome Mr. Amit Banka to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for this very, very exciting conversation. This was my first time, Nikhil, that we are chatting, but Hita and Michael, we've met and we've talked about a lot of things together. Couple of things that it came to my mind while listening to your conversation was very simple, that are we still talking about education in the form that we have been educated since beginning? Because the moment we say protecting our mother nature, that's why we call Mother Nature, I don't think we can make anyone learn how to protect our mother or nature or whatever basics that we have to be taught from day one. It's like learning your own mother tongue. So do you think that making education like a heavy word for something that's so basic that we need to work on is the right thing to do? Because the moment we do that, then it becomes restricted to very few people who are actually going to the school, right? And there is, between Africa and India, there are millions of kids who still are outside the school, but they still need to contribute to nature in some form. So considering the fact that all of you have been so widely working towards protection of nature, and especially bringing kids up to the mark to ensure that they contribute to climate action, how do we make it so seamless, so simple, so non-jargony, to ensure that it's not about dinner table, it's not about anything else, it's about essentially learning it in the womb of the mother before you come out and you're actually climate oriented in some form. That's one part. The other thing is that based on this conversation, I can also see that this is limited to some of the people who or kids who are taking this as vanity and not very purpose driven. So that is something that I like to again understand it from you, that how exactly we can make it more purpose driven rather than making it vanity. That okay, there are maybe 4 or 5 kids who are more excited about it and they do it till the time they are liking this particular thing, but it is not purpose driven. So there are a couple of points that came to my mind while I was listening to the conversation, that how do we make it more purpose oriented and how do we ensure that it is as simple as learning your mother tongue? That because that's the environment we have to create, because learning a mother tongue is actually an environment that you live in, right? Your entire family is talking that language and suddenly you are part of it. So maybe just a quick 1 minute from all of you. What do you think about this thought? I mean, Nikhil, we can go with you, or Hita.
Yeah, I just got prompt unmute. But no, I think these are 2 very, very valid thoughts that you've brought here to the discussion. I think children, when we're born, are naturally inclined to the natural world. Whether it's, looking after just going and playing in the mud, whether it's looking after a little plant, whether it's, chasing birds, butterflies, whatever that might be. And I think it's society that conditions them otherwise. So I think if children are just left to be, like if they're allowed to grow up in nature, if they're allowed to grow up at a pace and scale at which they understand things, allow them to ask questions about natural world. Why does a tree grow so tall? Or why does the wind blow this way? Asking questions which we may not have answers to, and that's perfectly fine. But letting the creativity live in the child. And I think that's the very first step to really making it a part of life. So I think it's our responsibility as adults to really ensure that we don't interfere in the child's growth to a certain extent, like, without, and this a lot of the time it's unknowingly. You're not doing it purposely, but it's just society, it's conditioning that we, certain things happen to be a certain way. You should not, roll in the mud because you're going to get dirty. Don't dirty your clothes. Don't do this. Don't do that. And this is where the disconnect from the natural world begins. So I think just re-looking at how our children are growing up, re-looking at what is the disconnect, or sort of what is the sort of reach that they have to the natural world, especially if they're growing up in cities. The reach is very, very limited. It's probably what you can see on your balcony or to the playground if you go to anything. So it's very difficult to answer this in one way, but I think there are different ways of how we can really start inculcating change. So really working with parents, working with teachers, working with people who influence children, who really work with them on a daily basis.
But don't you think then the education requirement is more with the parents rather than the kids?
Absolutely, 100%. But it's easier to create mind shift changes in children because they're still a lot more receptive.
But again, they are restricted by the parents because they are not aware about their, so that's where the dichotomy really struggling with right now.
There is an issue, but of course, if there is a child who says, I will not, throw litter on the street, and then will stop their parents from throwing litter on the street, of course, and there's a reversal change that happens.
Absolutely.
But there is limitations to what we do.
Okay. Nikhil, your point of view on this?
Okay, great. So I would like to refer to a couple of people I have been reading or watching. Okay, so this question specifically reminds me of this particular comedy show or gig from George Carlin, where he mentioned that when people say that they are environmentalists, someone says that he's an environmentalist or he's a conservationist. Okay, so aren't everyone born in nature, or every human should be an environmentalist by birth? Right. So when someone comes and proclaims specifically that I did this master degree and I am an environmentalist, okay, aren't we supposed to be in sustainable interaction with the mother nature? Okay, and he actually satires around this idea. It was a 1970s gig, and it's a very famous gig around environmentalists and people who proclaim that they want to save the mother earth. Okay, he even satirized the idea save mother earth. Okay, we need not to save the earth, right? We are just trying to prevent our own extinction. We're just trying to prevent our own survival. Okay, mother earth has seen 6 grand mass extinction before this, and she will observe one more. Okay? Maybe she will be more hurt about this one, but she will revive back and things will go back. Okay. And then I comes back to when we talk about children, specifically you mentioned that should we be teaching our kids about climate change or about parents' involvement, right? Gaston Bachelard was this famous philosopher, French philosopher. He mentioned how ecology of imagination of kids work well. So when he says ecology of imagination, kids' imagination is very, very broad when they interact with the nature, when they have a kind of education. We are pushing it right now, but in earlier education system, when we used to have ashrams or when we used to teach kids in the outdoors, okay, maybe the Krishnamurti schools right now, they actually propelled around the idea that we should be teaching kids in the nature. Okay, and this should not be an idea that we should climate education should be brought up now. This should be a integral part of the curriculum where they interact with the nature, and this should actually trigger the creativity in the child, where we actually focus the child to learn from the nature, observe things outside, build skills from that, and grow in that. And I totally agree that parents' transformation is much more needed in that, because in a capitalist system where we grow, we are pushed more towards learning skills which actually adapt us to seek a job rather than working on the fundamental survival or the life skills which we need right now. So we are more pushed towards learning skills to get a job rather than thinking about the basic connect with the nature or to skills which can help us sustain or survive in a much more sustainable manner.
Very good. I think I totally resonate with that thought. Michael, what's your thought?
I think from my perspective, what I have used and often has come to mind is that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So that has been like a mantra that I keep top of mind, because initially we tried projects and planting activities with the older folks. And, you know, it's about the activity. They want to be seen planting. They want to take pictures with their phones. And after that, it's over. And that's how we completely changed our programs. Now, going to how the thinking behind the education, yes, I think our education systems are faulty in their own way. And even if we took it to the community, right now, like like Nikhil said, we're dealing with a developing world where the issues of putting a meal on the table are so pressing, and capitalism is so pressing that issues to do with nature are second or third graded. So let's put it into perspective. It will be easier for us to know that we are trying to prepare the generation to come after us, to know not to do the same mistakes that we did in our generation. And the capitalism will only lead to more fault, to a more broken world than a healing world. Like, let me put it into perspective further, is the schools, some of the schools that we are going to, the kids come from neighborhoods where there are no trees. So even if I take trees to their families, it will be almost impossible for them to take them and plant them in their neighborhoods. But if these kids, most schools here have big environments, big compounds, they will be able to see the kind of environment they have in school as compared to where they live. And this builds again on their emotions, on their aspirations. But for sure, with the current system and the current way that we are going, based on statistics and facts, from the time the Fridays for Future strike started, the impact on climate has only increased, because it's one thing for the shouting outside and another thing for the action from the government. So there are so many things that need to be done from a very high policy level and a country level to impact the small person. So what we decided to do is that we start with where it's most easy to access and most easy to change. Because in 18 years to come, or say in 10 years for a 10-year-old, the 10-year-old will be a 20-year-old, and they will be able to vote for a leader, or vote for, or stand for the environment, or choose a leader, elect a leader whose policies and thoughts and ambitions are towards a sustainable or a better world. So I've been thinking about it that way, that we might be there for 20 years to come, but in 10 years, for all the students that we have dealt with from grade 4, they will be now adults. Yeah. And most of them will have taken some of these behaviors with them. So just maybe to highlight that as what we have seen or noted, and the challenge we are faced with the adults.
Right. No, I think all these points are extremely valid, and I think it just gives me more food for thought, but for a later day. So maybe Kathy, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you guys for joining us. Do we have any other questions? No other questions? So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for this very insightful conversation, and for sharing the work that you're doing, as well as highlighting the need for a green childhood. So thank you everyone who's come and joined us today. Thank you for your questions, and looking forward to our next event. Thank you guys. Thank you, Michael, Hita, and Nikhil.
Thank you.
See you again next time.